This lesson is an introduction to trigonometry, where we're going to take and we're going to find the different sides and angle measures in a triangle using trigonometry. So we're going to start by having you pause this video and use the internet to answer the question, what is trigonometry and how is it used? Now that you've taken a look at that question, you probably saw information about surveying. That's a practical application of it. Also maybe applications to other academic areas such as calculus or maybe physics. The study of trigonometry, though, is the study of angles and their relationships to the sides of triangles, oftentimes in right triangles. In fact, we're going to start off by just looking at right triangles. So looking at this first example here, to review a little bit about what you've learned in previous courses about sine, cosine, and tangent, which are three basic trig functions. Sine is listed as the opposite of angle theta, which is listed here, which we will start using some Greek letters when listing measures of angles. So the opposite of theta is this side 4, and then the hypotenuse is 5. So the listing for sine of theta, that's equal to 4/5. Now we also can do cosine, which is the adjacent side, which is this 3. That's over the hypotenuse, which is that 5. And that's equal to 3/5 when we find that one. And then lastly, when we do this, we can also do tangent. And tangent is where you take the opposite side, put it over the adjacent side, and that's equal to 4/3 for that. Now what's going to be new, and probably maybe something you haven't done before, is we're going to look at the reciprocals of each of these. So if you look at the reciprocal of sine, you get what's called cosecant. So the reciprocal trig functions are going to be new for you. The reciprocal of cosine is secant, and the reciprocal of tangent is cotangent. So if you've actually learned sine, cosine, and tangent, you can get cosecant, secant, and cotangent by looking at their reciprocals. So let's talk about how we label these then. If we label a triangle, so if I list a triangle and I just go with a right triangle where I have C be my right angle, and then I'll have this angle be A and this angle be B. We use the big letters, capital letters, for angles. That's important to realize because what we'll do is we'll use the little letters opposite them. So I go opposite this angle A and I list little a opposite it. Opposite B puts B on this side over here, and then opposite C is the hypotenuse, little c on that side. So we'll oftentimes use big letters or Greek letters for the angles, and then the little letters to go opposite them. Now, let me give you a couple examples of some Greek letters. Theta is an example of one. That's what a theta looks like. Alpha is another one. And then beta is another one. So you'll see those used at different times. Now, let's talk about what it's called solving right triangles. Solving right triangles means we're going to find the missing sides and the missing angles. The way we do that is we find the angles. If we have two of them, we know that all of them add up to 180. So we use that fact to find the missing angle. If we have two sides in a right triangle, then we use the Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, in order to find the missing side. Now, if we have a combination of other information where we can't use those, then we're going to use the trig functions to get that. So let's make sure that we try setting up our format in the right process to be able to do that, and also try a couple problems here. So first of all, make sure that when you're working with your calculator, that your calculator is now in degrees. If you haven't put it in degrees yet, make sure it's in degrees. Now later we'll learn about a different angle measure, way to measure angles, but for now make sure it's in degrees. So this problem down here, we have angle 37, and we have the adjacent side to it, which is 11. X is also adjacent to it, but that's since it's opposite the right angle, that makes it the hypotenuse. So the 11 is the adjacent side, the x is the hypotenuse. The trig function that involves the adjacent and the hypotenuse is cosine. So cosine of 37 is going to equal that adjacent side 11 over the x. Now the way to get that x out of the denominator is to multiply by it on both sides. So x times cosine of 37 equals 11. And then we divide by cosine of 37 on both sides to get x by itself. So 11 divided by cosine of 37, we get approximately equal to, when we do that, about 13.8. So that's our answer for that problem. Let's try this, have you try this next one. So if you could pause the video, try to find x in this problem, and then we'll come back and do it together. Now that you've tried that problem, notice that the angle given to you is the 40 degrees, and that it has x is the side opposite it. And the 28 is the one that's adjacent to it. That's the one that's right next to it. And so if you've got opposite and adjacent, that's the tangent function. So tangent of 40 is going to equal x over 28. Multiply by 28 on both sides times tangent of 40. And that's what your x will equal. When we do that on our calculator, we get x approximately equal to 23.5 for our answer. So that's how you use solving triangles to get missing information and try to solve for it. Now this next one, what we're going to do is we're going to calculate out all 6 trig functions if this is a given piece of information. If we know that sine of angle B is equal to 5/8, then we're going to use that information to go ahead and find sine, cosine, tangent, and their reciprocals. So let's draw, first of all, a triangle. So triangle ABC. I'll put B down here because that's the one that's referenced here in sine of B. C is my right angle. I'll put A up here. So we've got sine of B equal to 5/8, so I'm going to go opposite side. That's going to be my 5. And the hypotenuse will be 8. Now, what's missing is this little side A. So let's go ahead and calculate that using the Pythagorean theorem. So a squared plus 5 squared is equal to 8 squared. So a squared is going to equal 64 minus 25. So a squared will equal 39. So a is just going to equal the square root of 39. Now it's plus or minus technically, but since it's the side of a triangle, we'll just use the positive. So let's find now the 6 trig functions. So we want to find sine of A. That's equal to the opposite side to A, which is the square root of 39. And I'm going to put it over the hypotenuse, which is 8. Now I can immediately then do my cosecant of A, because that's the reciprocal. Cosecant of A is going to then equal 8 over the square root of 39. To rationalize that, I multiply it by the square root of 39 over the square root of 39, as we've done before. So that equals 8 square roots of 39 over 39 for my cosecant. Let's do cosine. So cosine of A is going to be the side adjacent to angle A, which is a 5, over over the hypotenuse, which is 8. So then, to find the secant, I do the reciprocal. So you just take that 5/8 and do its reciprocal, and you get 8/5. And then we'll do our tangent of A. Tangent of A is the opposite side, which is the square root of 39, over the adjacent side, which is 5. Its reciprocal, cotangent of A, then is going to have the square root in the denominator because we just flip that fraction over and we rationalize it by multiplying by square root of 39 over square root of 39. And you get 5 square roots of 39 over 39 for our answer. So there's all 6 trig functions calculated from just the initial information of what sine of one of the angles equals. Now, what if we were asking you to find the angle measure for angle B? Now remember, we originally gave that sine of B is equal to the 5/8, and to do find what B is, you have to use what's called the inverse trig function. On your calculator, what you do to do that, the inverse trig function means you're going to do the inverse trig function of that 5/8, and that gives you the angle. So the inverse trig function of 5/8 on your calculator, if you look at your calculator, you look for the second function that's just above your sine function. It has that little -1 above it. That's the inverse trig function. And when you do the inverse trig function of parentheses 5/8, you get about 38.68 degrees for an answer. So that's how you find an angle using the sides of the triangle. All right, now let's go ahead and define some new information. Angle, and you might have used this before when you did in geometry, when you did angle of elevation and depression. When you do these, you have to make sure you go with a side that's straight out and then for angle of depression, you go downwards from it. And notice that that angle goes down for our angle of depression. It's important to recognize that because what happens is, here is a common pitfall that people do, is what they'll often do is they'll draw that going down marking here, but where they'll put the angle is they'll put it here instead. They'll put it right on this part. And that is not what we want to do. It's in this spot that the angle of depression is. So make sure you measure it from the straight out, looking straight from where you're at, the horizontal, and then from the horizontal you measure down for the angle of depression. Now for the angle of elevation, on the other hand, angle of elevation from the straight horizontal elevation, you just go up from there, and that's that angle for the angle of elevation. So for these, you're going to use these in different word problems. So let's try an example. This example says Jonah looks up at the top of a mast on a boat at an angle of elevation of 52 degrees. So let's draw that first part here. So what we get is when Jonah is here, he looks from straight out, he looks up, and that's at 52 degrees. That's our angle of elevation. Now the mast here, it's got a sail on it or whatever. It says if Jonah's 21 feet away from the base of the mast, so this is 21 feet, this is 52, And how tall is the mast? So I'm going to call that h for how tall the mast is. So to set up the trig function here, we're looking at the opposite side from the angle and the adjacent side, so that's the one next to it. So opposite and adjacent gives us the tangent function. So tangent of 52 degrees is going to equal that opposite side over the adjacent, multiplied by 21 to get the 21 out of the denominator. So you get 21 times tangent of 52 equals h. We do that on our calculator, 21 times tangent of 52, we get about 26.9 feet for the height of the mast. So what we do is we learned about three new trig functions, the reciprocal functions of our sine, cosine, and tangent, our cosecant, secant, and cotangent. And we also learned how to use the information we're given to either find missing angles or missing sides. And then we can also do word problems that involve angle of elevation, which is from the horizontal looking up, and angle of depression, which is from the horizontal looking down. We'll do more examples coming up, but here's how you solve trig problems.